Hi, I'm Claire. As it's been said, I'm the co-founder and editor-in-chief at Pivot, un média d'information indépendant et progressiste basé à Montréal. And I also happen to be trans, so that's why I'm talking to you today. So, je suis très heureuse aujourd'hui d'introduire la discussion Common Struggle, Uniting Queer, Trans and Labor Movements Against the Far Right. Je pense en effet que la solidarité des syndicats et des organisations progressistes en tout genre, c'est un enjeu fondamental de la lutte contre la haine et les attaques que nos communautés subissent en ce moment. Les moyens et la légitimité dont disposent les syndicats et les organisations progressistes d'envergure sont incomparables et ont le potentiel de renverser l'inquiétante tendance actuelle, mais tout n'est pas gagné. Before I let the stage to our main speakers, I'd like to give you an idea of the importance of this event here tonight based on what I've seen as a trans journalist from Quebec. In Quebec, unlike in most of Canada and in the US, but like in the UK, transphobia likes to take a progressive face, often pretending to be a feminist struggle. You have heard of infamous TERFs, trans-exclusionary radical feminists, though I personally prefer to call them feminist-identified conservative. So, yeah. Le groupe anti-trans le plus important au Québec est financé par l'État et s'appelle Pour les droits des femmes, For the Rights of Women. Voilà, c'est aussi un groupe aux accents islamophobes parce que ce sont toujours les mêmes personnes. Mais ce genre de groupe-là n'est pas exclusif à ma province. Au niveau canadien, il y a aussi le Women's Human Rights Campaign qui est similaire. If transphobic reaction can take on the face of good old-fashioned authentic progress, the danger is that major progressive institutions, like unions, will fall for it and ally themselves with hate campaigns, or more likely remain paralyzed, divided from within between two trends that look equally left-wing, leaving the trans and LGBTQ+ communities to fend for themselves. C'est pourquoi, au Québec, la création d'alliances avec les organisations traditionnellement progressistes a été un aspect crucial de la stratégie de résistance, mais avec un succès relatif. In Quebec, the trans communities are facing the menace of a wise men committee. It's a committee that has been created by the government to investigate sensitive questions related to gender identity. A large campaign has been launched to demand the abolition of the committee, the scope of which has rarely been seen before in the LGBTQ+ movement. But even if more than 100 of organizations, community orgs, student groups, and feminist groups, including la Fédération des femmes du Québec, even if they join the movement, the unions are still mostly absent from the coalition. Last time I checked, only 2 union groups had joined the campaign. On voit donc qu'une coalition progressiste est en train de se créer autour de la résistance queer et trans, malgré les prétentions de la réaction transphobe à représenter le vrai progressisme. La participation des groupes féministes est un tournant important dans l'histoire de nos luttes. C'était pas gagné d'avance, mais la solidarité des syndicats est encore incertaine, puisqu'ils se font surtout remarquer par leur silence relatif sur cet enjeu qui est divisif au sein de la gauche. I hope so that tonight's discussion will convince you not only of the importance of the queer and trans fight against the far right, but also of the utmost importance of your contribution to the struggle. I will invite you to listen closely to our speakers tonight. First, Faye Johnstone is the Executive Director of Wisdom to Action, a progressive consulting firm and social enterprise. She's a prominent advocate for queer and trans rights and a recurring voice in Canadian news. Debbie Owusu-Achia is a first-generation Ghanaian Canadian queer woman and feminist activist, currently the Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity, providing advocacy and education to schools, organizations, and communities. The conversation will be moderated by Luc Lebrun, editor of the investigative media Press Progress, whose work on far-right movements and their recent turn toward anti-trans politics is very enlightening. So listen closely, please.
Hello. Faye and Debbie, thank you for being here, and thank you for your advocacy work, more importantly. I want to start our discussion by anchoring it within this recent wave of anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ hate that we've been seeing emerging over the last few years. Obviously people have faced discrimination for their sexual and gender identities throughout history, but I think it's fair to say that we've been seeing something accelerate over the last year or two especially that's been pretty unprecedented, and both in terms of its intensity, but also just in the way it's crossing lines in really serious ways. And I'm thinking back to my own reporting with Press Progress over the last year or two, where we've seen really chaotic scenes at school board meetings, where you have people with various anti-LGBTQ type grievances who are showing up. Sometimes these are people who do not actually have kids in these schools. Some of them are not even parents. Many come from out of town. We know some of them are connected to the Freedom Convoy or, fringy far-right conspiracy groups. We've seen also these chaotic scenes at libraries where people are attempting to disrupt drag storytime events. Also at schools themselves. I mean, here in Ottawa, we had a group of anti-trans activists holding rallies outside 3 schools, and it resulted in kids as young as in kindergarten being ordered to shelter in place while these people were, just kind of running amok in the streets. And so I've even reported on, national security officials who are paying closer attention to extremists with grievances about gender. We had the incident at the University of Waterloo where, a person came into a classroom and attacked people with a knife, and that's now being prosecuted under terrorism laws. Anyways, I could go on and on about this, but I want to anchor the conversation in this recent wave of hate that we've been seeing. So, Faye, you've been literally and figuratively on the front lines of this wave that we've been seeing. I want to start by asking you, what has this looked like for trans people in Canada, just on a personal level? What are you hearing from people in your community?
That is a great question. And hi, Broadbent. How y'all doing? I think I often say, we've made immense progress in the last 30 to 40 years on the rights of queer and trans people. The world has changed. We have queer couples. We have marriage equality. We have freedom to be ourselves to a degree that we've never seen in contemporary Canadian history. But right now, what we're seeing is the price that we pay for that progress, and that is a backlash. In the last year, we've seen 3 provinces rolling back on the rights of trans and gender diverse kids and their families. We're seeing staggering assaults on progressive movements under the guise of anti-trans hate. And all of that is leading to a community that was never doing okay to begin with, right? Trans folks are more likely to be poor, more likely to be working class, to be homeless, to be survivors of violence, now having this whole machine of the far right stomping on them. And what that looks like in community is a lot of doom and gloom. A lot of folks who are worried, both worried for their everyday survival, but also worried about how far this is going to go. And that's what keeps me up at night, is this is just the beginning of a regressive movement that is using new slogans and new tactics to radicalize Canadians, not just against queer and trans people, but against gender and sexual diversity, against feminist values, against the progressive movement writ large. And that is a fight that we need to wake up to.
Right. So, I mean, Debbie, the trans community has obviously been taking the main brunt of these attacks over the last few years, but we're also seeing the scope expand to broader grievances about gender and sexuality, and the targets seem to keep multiplying. So I think some people might look at this stuff and think this might just be a trans issue, and they file it away in the part of their brain where, this doesn't personally impact me, so they might not care as much. Can you spell why this is not just a trans issue?
Excellent question. Oh, so hi everyone. To contextualize it, like I'm coming into this conversation as a Black cisgender queer woman who is very much so invested in the protection of trans people in my community because they're my community members, but it's also because of what else is at stake. And what else is at stake is the rights of all marginalized people. The unfortunate reality is that with where things are with public opinion and people's understanding of trans folks, it is very minimal, which makes them the prime target to punch on when really we're all being targeted. The goal right now is the regression of rights that are hard fought, that are LGBTQ legislation, it's feminist legislation that protects the rights of women, but it's also your labor rights, it is rights of migrants, it is all of the things that push against the status quo. However, it is not popular to publicly punch Black people. Actually, depending on who you talk to, that happens, but there are political consequences for that. I think what we're currently seeing right now with right-wing politicians across this country is that they haven't suffered the consequences politically to punch down on trans people, hence why that group of people are being presented as the public face of what is a bigger, much more coordinated, much more well-resources attack on trying to reverse all of the rights that we have fought on. And so that's what's happening right now.
And if I can get in, just to zero in, because I think we think of that as like an abstraction a lot of the time. But if we use Alberta as the case study, in Alberta, you've got a government that is putting itself between kids and the healthcare they need, and normalizing government intervention to deny access to quote unquote controversial care. If we think that is anything other than a Trojan horse assault on abortion access and abortion rights, we are deluding ourselves. If we look at the assault on comprehensive sexuality education, that is an effort to force out education that helps people make informed decisions about their body, access evidence-based information, and to navigate a diverse and changing world. If we look at their invocation of the notwithstanding clause in Saskatchewan and likely soon in Alberta, possibly in New Brunswick, that is normalizing overriding charter-protected rights. They might do it for trans kids, but they're coming for worker rights next. They're coming for women's rights next. They're coming for the rights of racialized communities next. It is so much more than just trans folks, but we don't notice and pay attention as much because it's about trans folks.
So none of the premiers in the provinces that you just mentioned, none of them ran on these issues. They've just kind of popped up out of the blue. What's your take on the politics behind this sudden shift in focus?
So in New Brunswick, it was a distraction from a premier dealing with cabinet crises. In Saskatchewan, it was a premier who was having his voters pulled away to an even further right party. In Alberta, it was a premier who is probably the most precarious premier in this country, given that her predecessor was ousted by her own party, and she has an extremely organized social conservative base. And to Debbie's point, if she was to, come out of the gate and say, we're gonna mess with abortion access, or we're gonna screw with, anti-racism efforts, there would have been a condemnation. So she needed something that was salient to the public that she could throw to those social conservatives. So all of this is cynical politicians using the public's lack of familiarity with trans people to score cheap points instead of delivering on the issues that Canadians care about, which is healthcare, jobs, housing, public education. Those are the priorities that most of us care about, that we all align on, but they're using these trans issues to shore up support in a fringe and bring that fringe closer to the mainstream within a broader far-right agenda.
Debbie, I have the same question, but I want to talk about more in an education context. So, a lot of the people who are showing up to these school board meetings, they're focused on stuff like SOGI 123 and these inclusive, type educational policies and programs. Where's this coming from? Why is there a sudden focus on these issues, at the school board level and on a more local level?
Absolutely. So I'm a bit of a history nerd, so I feel I have to give the history lesson, but then also what we are seeing right now in the contemporary sense. But also tied to what Faye and I opened with in terms of what's really happening right now. This is fascism, by the way, folks, like what we are seeing, and it becomes fascism when governments are given consent by the public, AKA the people whom they want votes from, to have authoritarian responses to regressing rights. So that's one thing I want to name, but that requires strategy and like work. And it also requires being extremely careful and clever with how you frame a particular issue, like safety, for example, which is a key part of what the anxieties with inclusive policies we're seeing in schools. The real quick history lesson that I wanted to give is that if we go back to the 60s and 70s, during a time after the Stonewall riots, when LGBTQ rights were first being fought for in the contemporary sense, they have always been fought for since colonization of this land. But people are familiar with like Anita Bryant and this woman, country artist star, who was presented as like the face of the movement of not wanting gay people to teach kids. It was an issue around morality, and that the proximity of these kids to gay people were going to corrupt their morality. And having a white woman be the poster child of that was extremely strategic in getting more women to the side of people who were looking to entrench the status quo, which were obviously primarily white men who were social conservative, et cetera. Fast forward now, that same recruitment tactic is being used, which again manufactures this consent that we're seeing conservative governments use by saying, oh, well, this is what people want, look at the polling data. Please don't ever try to like use polling data to inform human rights, because that's not what we're supposed to do. So what we're seeing with this idea of, the anxieties with schools and wanting to push back on this is meant to bring the movable middle to the other side. And for parents who is doing the most care work, it is mothers, those people are meant to be brought to that side. So that's the history lesson to the modern, but what actually is really happening, and I think this is more of a critique on what we should be doing better, and please don't fight me for this, we need to actually probably unpack what are some of the things that the other side is saying that might actually be true in terms of anxieties. And there are legitimate anxieties when it comes to the education system. I graduated from the Dufferin Catholic Peel District School Board in 2010. And the same issues that my parents had struggles with trying to penetrate to understand as immigrant working class parents still exist today. So it's true, parents want their kids to be safe in schools, parents want their kids to have an education, et cetera. Those anxieties still exist, but they're exacerbated by so many things, the pandemic, cost of living, et cetera, and our schools become a melting pot of all of those issues. So these anxieties are legitimate. But what is the goal of the other side is to polarize us. And they're really good at polarizing us when they find the people who've been disenfranchised by the left. And it's these parents who, for whatever reason, could be xenophobia or racism, still don't really get to understand education because the language that's used isn't inaccessible. They're working nights, so they can never be part of a parent-teacher group, et cetera. These things still exist, and what the people who should be well-positioned to do that education work, we actually aren't doing that. So who comes in and goes, hey, it's the other side. And so what is true are those legitimate anxieties. What also is happening is these fabricated things that are whipped up from a rhetoric perspective to distract, as Faye spoke to. So all of a sudden we're hearing now what is an anxiety and not understanding what my kids are learning to, oh, by the way, teachers are trying to teach your kids how to have sex and are trying to trans your kids, these things that we hear. If you are misinformed, if you have not been able to actually fully understand curricula in whatever province or territory you're in, yes, you are primed to be brought in and moved to the other side, which is why we're seeing all of this hysteria. You've all seen the images. If you live in Ottawa, some of us were probably at the counter-protest last June when, far-right folks were galvanized to protest out of a school here. These things are happening at the same time. So there are things that are true that are creating anxieties for many people, and they're being exacerbated by trying to survive a very chaotic world right now. But then there are also people who are very clever at misinformation, and what we need to be doing is filling that gap by trying to inform folks and do public education work, which is historically what we have done before. So we got to do that.
So I guess picking up on hysteria and misinformation, Faye, last fall, conservative leader Pierre Poilievre delivered a speech in Richmond Hill where he claimed Justin Trudeau is imposing quote-unquote radical gender ideology on children in Canadian schools. I talked to you for that story. I also spoke with the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, Anti-Defamation League in the United States, Human Rights Watch. All of them told me that this gender ideology rhetoric is basically a conspiracy, and what this all boils down to is this idea that schools are trying to turn kids gay and trans, basically. But my question isn't about Poilievre, it's actually about the media coverage, because with that specific incident, other than Press Progress and, to their credit, CBC Power and Politics picked it up, Rachel Gilmore did some stuff on it as well. The rest of the media basically gave Poilievre a pass. So my question to you is, first of all, why is it hard for the media to wrap their heads around these issues? But also, what is the impact on people in your community when those kinds of comments get ignored?
It's dangerous, right? On a simple level, I think, media is still generally no shade to straight folks, is a whole bunch of straight folks and 3 gay people. We have 1 trans journalist in Quebec. You heard from her a second ago. Would be great if we had some more. But there isn't literacy, and I think a lot of us, I have the same issue with media to a certain extent that I do with a lot of progressive movements in this response, is that we have a value alignment. We say trans rights are human rights, and we leave it there, and so we don't often have deeper literacy to unpack and respond to the disinformation. And so our response is, parents don't have rights, they have responsibilities. If you're a Muslim mom or a newcomer mom and you're worried about your kid, you say that parent doesn't have rights, and you've just sent somebody right down that dangerous pipeline to a much scarier place. And so our response, our literacy to see through the disinformation isn't what it should be. We get bogged down in details instead of doing what we should be doing, which is speaking up for schools where whether you're a gay kid, a trans kid, a poor kid, or a disabled kid, you have the freedom to be yourself, you're safe in your classrooms, and you're treated with dignity. And to get further on this, I do think media needs to stop parroting the talking points of Poilievre. You don't have to cover his horrible comments about gender ideology with a headline about parental rights. You can talk about anti-trans or anti-LGBT or anti-freedom, and that is actually what these policies are. They are denying kids the freedom to be themselves. But when you parrot the parental rights stuff, as most outlets are doing, you're playing the far right's game for them.
So something you sometimes hear from people in political circles is that these right-wing culture war issues are, designed to divide working-class movements, and so the argument goes that, you should just, not give it oxygen, just ignore it. You're getting kind of, it's basically all just a distraction from meat and potato economic issues. But on the flip side, if you did that, you would basically be abandoning vulnerable communities, and in some cases, these are quite literally life or death situations, right? Anyway, so my question to you is, how do you reconcile this question? How do you avoid getting dragged into this sort of, culture war trap without abandoning vulnerable communities, or is this the whole framing, just the wrong way of looking at it?
So, I think first and foremost, this isn't just about trans people, and the assault on our rights we're just a convenient target, we're a scapegoat. Again, it's about worker rights, it's about women's rights, it's about the rights of racialized communities. And we need to understand that they're playing a game by using the culture war stuff to set the stage for a broader assault on the rights of marginalized and working class Canadians. My second piece is, we need to tap into this because they're putting the money into the opposition side of it. The response isn't to just cede territory to the far right. Where are we going to be if we do that? They already dominate, unfortunately, on many economic issues. We win often on the social issues, and so if we cede that space, we're going to have to fight like hell to get it back. And this is your workers. These are your kids. These are your friends. If this hate continues, already in the fall, I'm expecting Albertan families to have to leave that province because they're not going to be able to access the healthcare that their trans kids need. If we cede space here, we will see more homeless people, more trans kids kicked out of their homes. We will therefore see greater demand on our housing sector, on our homeless shelters, greater demand on our emergency rooms. The social issues are tied to the economic issues, and we cannot cede space because lives will be lost, opportunities will be curtailed, and a whole generation of queer and trans people that are literally just beginning to raise our heads and walk tall in spaces like these are going to be shoved back into the closet after we were told that these movements were our pals and would always fight with us. So there is no option here. This is not just about trans people, and we need the full progressive left to wake up, because my folks are fighting this fight, and we are losing.
I want to shift to talking about the threat to public education specifically. Debbie, you've argued that the far right is trying to politicize public education and trying to turn schools into kind of a culture war arena. I guess, two questions here. So first of all, what are you hearing from educators and school boards and teachers unions about what they're seeing in classrooms and on the ground? And then also, to what extent is some of the harassment that we've already been talking about and some of the, in some cases, these are presenting real workplace safety issues. To what extent is this a labor issue?
Great question. And I'll start off by adding to what Faye mentioned with regards to people seeing this as unrelated to labor at all. And I would just tell folks who work in the labor movement, you need to connect the dots. You need to be able to connect what's happening with your workers to what's happening to people who you might not immediately think are the first point of contact for the issues you're working on. And to honestly listen to the issues that workers are dealing with and use that as the entry point to share the story and the narrative of why all of our issues are connected. And so when it comes to education, what I'm hearing, and I've been fortunate enough to speak to school boards and teachers unions around what they're hearing, what they're dealing with, what they're facing. And right now, what we're seeing is an interesting dynamic, which I think is an indication of the success of the other side being able to set a trap for many of us who are doing this work. And what I am seeing right now, which have been told to us, and I'll just say it plainly, that we have primarily, well-meaning white teachers who are afraid to call out discrimination against LGBTQ people in their classrooms because they do not want to be seen as racist. At first, when I heard that, I was like, what? But then I'm like, you know what? That's because of the trap that has been set with the things like parental rights and this idea of wanting to be a very good person and not wanting to step on toes. And what happens when issues from one side and the other are seen as opposed to each other. And so what's happening is we have a lot of afraid teachers. They're afraid, and they're afraid to want to uphold things like inclusion on LGBTQ because they're fearful of what reaction they're gonna get. And if you're someone who's chronically online like I am, you will have probably seen some of the targeted online attacks on teachers whose names, schools, etc. have been put online, mainly because they have had small signals to showcase that they support all of their students, but it's the support for LGBTQ students that becomes weaponized as you're indoctrinating, etc. So there's this fear that these teachers are facing. Where it becomes a labor issue is very much so connected to what I just said. And this has been something that I've been telling teachers' unions and school boards about what they're facing and what tools they have in front of them to be able to plant two flowers with one seed that I like to use as opposed to the more violent analogy. You can use the tactics of labor to actually play the long game of solidarity with LGBTQ people. And it's not even just solidarity. It is just, again, wanting to protect the rights of all people. And you can start with your rights as a worker. That the conditions that have been created as a result of this polarization are making it unsafe for you. You are at the front line of what is a melting pot of world issues. And teachers are being targeted because people are seeing that supportive adults need to be taken down. And so that's how you could actually use your collective bargaining process to maybe fight for things that ensure that you're protected. But then while simultaneously holding your school boards accountable for some of the distracting policy BS that we see. Whether this is a school board who's distracted by trustees who want to fly a pro-abortion flag, but then using that as part of the rhetoric to be like, this is why we can't fly an LGBTQ one. Those school boards have a right to ensure that you are safe as a worker. And when they are distracted with these cultural things, that takes away from your ability to show up to ensure safe schools are there for these students. So while your classrooms are overflowed with students, while teachers are quitting the field because they aren't getting well funded, you are best positioned to use the space you're in at Workers to actually bring the story and drive the story home to ensure that you're protected, but also all students, which is actually the real thing. That's the anxiety that people are really talking about, is just that we have people who are utilizing problematic tactics to distract from the real issues. And so, yeah, use your workers' rights, folks.
So critics are often framing their criticisms of these, inclusive school policies and programs as, being about parental authority or parental rights. Let's talk about this rhetoric, because it seems to me that this is zeroing in on, anxieties about the breakdown of the traditional family and the breakdown of gender roles. Who's this rhetoric really targeting, and what is it trying to do? And obviously, why is it problematic?
So baseline is we all believe in safe schools. We all believe in schools where kids are healthy, happy, and thriving. And we also all believe that parents should be as actively involved as possible in the lives of their kids, because that leads to healthy, happy, thriving young people. What this rhetoric does is it insinuates a few things. One, it insinuates, underpinning it is the idea that teachers are hiding something, that there's something scary or devious. And second, it's a trap, because it means that we say parents don't have rights, they have responsibilities. If you tell a parent that, you are furthering a divide that doesn't serve any of us. And so it is this, it's ironic, because if you look at the school policies, Saskatchewan passed a Parent Bill of Rights that wasn't about strengthening parental roles in local school boards or in education curricula, or their role in every other aspect of their kids' education. It was literally like, we're gonna use this slogan, and then no one's going to notice that the policies are literally just about the trans kids. And so it clouds the conversation. I believe in responsible government and sound public policy. If you have that, that means you chat with teachers, you chat with young folks, you chat with parents to develop interventions. We had policies that were nuanced, policies that'll encourage and gave young folks the freedom to be themselves, that encourage parent involvement, that made sure that we were ready if there were situations where a young person was at risk. But every teacher's ideal outcome when a kiddo comes out as trans is that that kid is out at school and at home, because that leads to a happier, healthier child. But again, it packages this, it sets a trap where we say, no, there's no such thing as parent rights. And that just fuels more of the radicalization, more of the misinformation. And they pair this with all of these false narratives about what's happening in schools. Believe it or not, the reason we raise a pride flag isn't because we're pushing any kind of gay agenda. The reason we raise a pride flag is the same reason that schools participate in Ramadan. It is to show Muslim kids, to show gay kids, in both of those situations, that they deserve to be seen, safe, and supported at school. And I'll leave it there.
So I know, Momentum has done some interesting research into best practices when it comes to, how to communicate with these issues and, try to bring more people on side. How do you approach people who are being won over by this rhetoric or misled by misinformation? What are some of the insights that you've been able to figure out through this kind of research?
So my biggest advice is I use the term the gays to talk about queer and trans communities. I am trans, you cannot come for me, and you also can't say it, so it's fine. Sorry. No, but what I would say is my folks come in with our fists up, and we have a good reason to, right? Queer and trans folks are scared in this moment. We are worried, we're seeing regression, and we are used to governments and society punching down on us. This is not the time for us to go in with our fists up. in response to misinformation and disinformation, particularly when it is trying to pit our sibling movements and pals against each other, we need to connect on shared values. Again, we all agree that students deserve the freedom to be themselves, to be safe at school, and to learn about respecting a different kind of world than generations before. So we connect on shared values. We also validate anxieties. I know that you as a parent are passionate and invested in your child's education, and I'm actually excited to have this conversation with you. Now, at the same time, I think there's a lot being said in the social sphere about what's happening in our schools, and I'd like to take some time to have a conversation with you about that. And then you pair it into, there are folks out there who are lying about what's happening in our classrooms and who aren't doing it in the best interest of you or your family or your kids. They're doing it because they want you to be angry. They want you to be distracted, because when you're distracted, you don't notice that they keep cutting our school budgets. You don't notice that your kid can't get access to a family physician without a 3-year wait list. And so we have to engage, we have to extend an olive branch and have these kinds of conversations. On my Instagram, I will call the bad guys all kinds of bad things. When I am in community, when I am navigating these kinds of conversations, we need to be the ones who are reasonable and who are ready for the discussion, because I actually believe in the power of our ideas. Our policies are the right policies for all of our families, but we're not having those conversations, and part of it is because we need our allies to be having those conversations. I am not the right ambassador for half of the times that I'm in the media rambling about queer stuff. I want a dad from rural Alberta with a 15-year-old kid saying, do not put your government between my kid and his healthcare. Do not make my kid's life harder in school. We do not have an even playing field because I look a little bit different than most people expect. And so if y'all are having those conversations, it takes a poisoned environment and brings it back to a mature adult conversation in the best interest of our kids and all our families.
So, a lot of this stuff, Debbie, a lot of this stuff is being driven, we know, by stuff that's online. And, in some cases that stuff is quite literally radicalizing people and inciting real world violence. And it does seem like we're all kind of struggling about, how to figure this stuff out. I mean, the federal government is currently proposing online harms legislation. But where do you think the emphasis needs to be when we're thinking about this problem and like the online kind of component to it?
Yeah, I think on the online piece, I think we're still trying to figure it out. And I think that this is a collective thing that we need to address. Because I think what feels good in the short term, especially when these policies come in and it feels like it's in response to the far right, we're like, yes, they've done it. This is going to protect us, especially for the internet making things worse. What we fail to look into in the long term is how that is going to be weaponized against our movements, because we've seen that happen. This could be, anxieties that some people had around the use of the Emergency Measures Act during the convoy. I was very much so entrenched on looking at what was happening, but my immediate thought was, folks, this is absolutely going to be used against us at some point. And I was a couple weeks ago at a press conference for Horizon Ottawa, which is a municipal progressive organization here, shout out if they're here, around bylaw against megaphones at protests, which again, in the short term, we see it as something that is in response to far-right actions with the convoy. But what ended up happening was Palestinian protesters were the ones getting bylawed tickets. Folks who were advocating for LGBTQ rights were getting bylaw tickets. And so we're still trying to figure out the thing on the online side. I think it's just really important for us to think critically about the long-term game and how exactly we should be pushing for government to make changes in laws and recognizing that, yes, what feels good immediately is something that will be responding to far-right action will absolutely be weaponized against our movements too. So what other options should we be looking at? That's something that I would want people to give a thought to.
So, last fall, Faye, there was the Million Man March for Children in cities across Canada. It was supposed to be about protecting children from, the gender ideology in schools. In that case, we actually saw quite a large union presence on, in the streets in Ottawa. There were, prominent political leaders who were marching in Parliament Hill. And this Million March for Children thing was happening in a number of cities across Canada. And, in some cases, the counter-protesters actually outnumbered the people participating in this march. And actually, there's this great video of one of them who's just freaking out because he's been surrounded by, all the counter-protesters and sort of freaking out. I'm wondering, what is the value in getting bodies into the streets and showing mass solidarity, in the face of these sort of far-right attacks?
This is where I struggle. I actually wish if I had been able to, all of those lovely months ago, I wish that we hadn't done it. I wish we had not counter-protested. I wish we'd all issued a press release that said, we're not going to go hang out with some wackos in a park. They're not worth our time. We're focused on a more free, equal, and socially just future. We're not going to go and meet these folks. I think we have an instinct to go and fight the fascists. We don't need to go and fight the fascists right on that line. Sometimes we do. What we need to do is we need to win hearts and minds and push good policy forward that delivers for, again, all of our families. And so I think I understand why we did that. I think it largely needed to happen, and it happened really organically, which was incredible to see. But in Ottawa, a lot of the folks on the opposition side were Muslim moms worried about their kids. The last thing that I need is a 21-year-old gay person with a side shave and blue hair, sorry, I was that, yelling at a Muslim mom. That breaks all of the things that we're trying to achieve here, because our movements need to be united for, again, a more free and equal Canada. And so I think my struggle is we aren't always as strategic as I would like us to be, and that's true in my space. That's also, I think, true in some of these spaces. And so we often take their bait instead of saying, why are we meeting them where they're at? Why don't we go over that way? And if we go over that way, they're going to be over there, and we're going to keep winning. They wouldn't have we gave them headlines across the freaking country because of these counter demos, and their narrative was save the kids, and we said no. That doesn't win anybody over, and so it is that we need a better message. We need to be strategic with our resources because they've got bigger, deeper pockets than we do, and so if we're gonna organize, let's organize not just to stop something, but to push for something better.
So last question, the title of this panel is Uniting Queer, Trans, and Labor Movements Against the Far Right. We have a room full of labor leaders and labor activists. My question to you is, how can the labor movement best protect trans kids and support your communities?
I'll start off, and I think it's in the title on movement and movement building, and that should be the priority because it forces us to, what Faye mentioned, to be strategic. And it forces us from moving away from what we've been doing, which is responding to the right, which is exactly, again, the trap that is being set up for us. By movement building and being strategic, we're thinking about the long game. We're thinking about using historical tools within the labor movement that have been proven to win, but also readjusting for the current context that we're in right now. And so this is an excellent opportunity for folks to come together and to strategize and to figure out what is the thing that we need to do now going forward to play the long game. Because you know who's really good at doing that? The far right. Not to say that we should be mimicking their tactics, but movement building has historically been the thing that got us our rights to begin with. And movement building is going to be the thing that allows us to push back against all of what is happening and to actually create the good society that we actually want at the end of the day. And so for labor that's here, honestly, folks, class is the thing that we're really good at talking about, but also forgetting. And the anxieties that people are feeling right now are legitimate. And when we are not good at responding to those anxieties, it allows every one of those people to feel disenfranchised and to look at the options that are being created by the other side as common sense, where we heard that before, and that's what pulls them to that other side. We need to do a good job at responding to what people's anxieties are and using that as the entry point to talk about why it is a common struggle. Like, that is your entry point. You're anxious because your employer won't increase your wages. I hear you on that. And that is also why having fascist governments that are authoritarian aren't going to change things. It's actually going to make things work. So how do we work together in building a movement? It's actually being really good, like, community members, and really not forgetting about class in all of this. And labor, that is your shtick. Go right into it, and I promise you, we're gonna build the world that we want.
I have a list. So I think, like, to contextualize, like, my job, my nonprofit is Society of Queer Momentum. Our role is to do the movement building, the people power, and the politics. So when New Brunswick happened, we connected all the New Brunswick queer organizations and helped mobilize there. We did the same thing in Saskatchewan. We're there in Alberta today. We're creating the tools, we're helping massage that message, and help a whole new generation of queer and trans advocates tap into a fight like we haven't had for over 20 years. What that means in practice when it comes to labor is we need support. We need support on a numbers game. We need bodies on the ground ready to mobilize and making this an issue. I want a future where no government and no party and no politician messes with the rights and freedoms of any of our communities. And we need to learn how to do that on this issue. We need to draw a line on this in the sand in Alberta, because if we let them win there, it's gonna jump back to New Brunswick and get worse. It's gonna jump again to Saskatchewan. Any conservative government that comes along will use this to bring forward an anti-worker, anti-woman, anti-race, anti-everybody agenda. And my sector is not ready for this fight. The queer and trans movement has made immense progress in the last 20 years. But many of our organizations, for very good reasons, are now predominantly government-funded entities that focus is delivering programs and services. That is incredible, because it means we're meeting the needs of folks on the ground, in communities. The homeless gay kid has somebody they can call. What we do not have is the resources, expertise to fight these kinds of political and public opinion battles. Labor has those skills. Labor has those skills. Labor has been fighting and never stopped fighting, because you always have to deal with bad bosses taking the most money they can from your pockets and putting it right back in theirs. And so my invitation to labor is recognize that this is an existential threat to progressive causes, and isn't just a time for a solidarity, cute, wholesome statement, but to activate and fight this fight, because this is the tip of a spear that Poilievre is going to ride all the way to office. He's going to use it to remove everything woke, which is literally everything gay, everything black, everything diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm almost done. And so my asks are, first, my organization is planning a big gay rainbow week of action from May 11th to 17th. It is not us counter-protesting. It is us showing that we will bring people out in every single city, town, and community to speak up for rainbow equality and a more free and equal future. If you are a labor organizer, I want you to take out your phone. Come on. Take out your phone. Go to open your email app. You're going to send me an email. fae@momentumcanada.net. And all I want you to do in that email body is say, here's my name, here's my org, happy to help. I want my phone to be buzzing, because in about 1 week, we're unveiling all of the confirmed rallies, our centralized website, and I need tens of thousands of people taking action across this country. So that's ask number one. Ask number two, follow us on social media, Queer Momentum. Ask number three is, I need to build a war chest. And this is the tricky ask. I don't like talking about money, but y'all, it is what you gotta do. The queer space has almost no money to play the political and advocacy game. If we had been ready in New Brunswick, if we'd had the right ad, the right message, and the bodies on the ground, we could have stopped this darn thing in its tracks. We were not there. My team's job is to be the war room for the gays. And we are ready to throw all of the mud, to also build all of the coalitions. And labor is already in there with us on that fight. But we need to bring it to scale, because if we do not get ourselves ready for the next election, we're gonna have an election where Poilievre stomps over trans people, and he's gonna have polls that show it's popular to do so. And that will make it easier for him to get elected, to distract us with gender woo-woo, while he brings forward an agenda that hurts our workers. And so my ask and call to action is step in, step up, help us fight this fight, because we can win it, we can stop this culture war BS, and we can get back to delivering for all of our families. Thank you.
Debbie, would you like to say any words about how people can help to find out more and support the work of the Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity?
Yes, I was like, oh, we conclude. I was like, Faye, you had like a nice punch there. I was like, we could end it there. But yes, the organization I work for works in support of 2S LGBTQ youth from coast to coast to coast. And we are doing this work in school communities across the country. I know there's a large teacher union presence that's here. Take a look at our website, which is ccgsd.org, ccgsd-ccdgs.org, and support our work by inviting us to your classroom, by donating, but then also amplifying some of the advocacy messaging we have that is youth-led and youth-driven. So keep it short and simple. That's how you can support us. And yes, we can't wait to fight the good fight with you.
You can say one more thing.
You got
Sorry,
this.
I'm bad at stopping. What I really like, I don't think if folks fully understand how tired the queer folks in this fight are right now. I have had to have security on me. I have had death threats. Every single darn month, there is a far-right article coming for me and coming for my friends. We have changed the world for a whole generation of queer and trans people. And we've told the young folks that they can be whoever they need to be, whoever they know themselves to be. And they can feel that space constricting. And I am so scared to see, these kids are going to be hurting after we've told them it's okay to be you and that you should have the freedom to be yourselves. And so I think strategically it's the right thing to do to tap in. Politically, it's the necessary thing to do. But Lord Jesus, come to bat for those kids, because they need adults in the room to fight this fight for them today.
Faye and Debbie, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you for having us.